introductions and we can get going.
Everybody's in. All righty. So we're going to kind of switch gears here. It's still talking about support. The support is critical. And now we've kind of talked about support from a provider in my angle, but support from mother's angle is as important, if not more important to me. So we have three fabulous women in our panel. Elizabeth Oak is a senior administrator for the Oklahoma Perinatal Quality Improvement Collaborative. As a child of refugee parents from Vietnam, she is very involved in her local Vietnamese community and loves spending time with her husband and 3 children. Welcome, Elizabeth. Sarah Johnson has worked for nearly a decade in the public health sector. In 2016, Sarah suffered a severe maternal event after the birth of her daughter, which led her to use her voice as an advocate for improving maternal health outcomes in Oklahoma. Thank you, Sarah, and welcome, Sarah. And Rachel Nelson is a wife, mother, U.S. Air Force veteran, and certified lactation counselor who currently works for the Oklahoma Mother's Milk Bank. Rachel has served as a board member for COBA and is an administrator for the Facebook page Breastfeeding Support Group for Black Moms. So we have a few questions. And Elizabeth, how about if we start with you? If you could kind of give us, briefly give us your breastfeeding stories, and what is one resource that you found helpful during your breastfeeding journey?
So with 3 kids under my belt, the first experience was awful. I cried every day, just trying to nurse him, and with each baby it's gotten a lot easier, but I think what was helpful was, I've been really fortunate to alongside the Oklahoma Breastfeeding Resource Center. They were right next door to me, made friends with them, learned a lot about my options. I didn't even know what an IBCLC was, and with each baby afterwards, I was able to see an IBCLC and took care of a tongue tie, and it's just been easy ever since. But with my first child, I suspect he had a tongue tie as well that just wasn't caught, and that's why I had such major issues breastfeeding, and it was not a fun time.
Okay. Is there one support, one resource that you found helpful at all during your breastfeeding journey?
Yeah, it would be just my relationship with OBRC and just learning more about IBCLCs. That's what eventually was the key to my breastfeeding journey.
Okay. So you went through the OBRs, you knew them already as part, and that's how you found that resource, or the lactation consultant resource?
Yes.
Okay, so it was, okay. Sarah, would you like to talk about what your breastfeeding journey has been, and what one resource that you found most helpful during your journey?
Sure, thank you. My breastfeeding experience was pretty unusual. I had a lot of complications after delivery of my daughter in 2016, and I had a lot of blood loss. I got about 12 units of blood in the first week after delivery, and I also had 3 surgeries. And all of that led to, also, my daughter ended up in the NICU at 8 days old in the PICU because she had RSV. She contracted RSV during that period that I was in the hospital. So she was 18 days old when she was finally released from the hospital, and when we finally came home. And all of that time really impacted our breastfeeding journey. I struggled and ultimately ended up exclusively pumping. And I started being able to actually fill bottles of milk when I was almost 12 weeks postpartum. That's how long it took me to start making enough to fill a bottle. So I had to supplement in that period of time. you know, my journey was really different than anybody else that I knew. I didn't know anybody who had exclusively pumped, and there wasn't a lot of information accessible to me about that. So my biggest resource ended up being social media. I searched and searched and found a social media support group for exclusive pumpers. And I use that a lot to help me to cope with it, to understand it, to get better at it, and to, you know, just accept the fact that that was our journey. I would say my other biggest helpful resource was my C1 nurse. I was lucky enough to be a first-time mom and have access to a children's first nurse through the health department in my local town. And she was visiting me regularly and helping me to understand, you know, breastfeeding and what my body was going to be doing, since I'd had such a traumatic experience to begin with, you know. And she really did give me a lot of support and helped me through, you know, a lot of the challenging aspects that came with such an experience.
All right. Yeah, you aren't the first person I've heard talk about that lack of support for exclusive pumping. But I know one thing I was listening to recently was saying, as exclusive pumpers, we called ourselves breastfeeders. Did you find that to be true?
Yeah, that's what we call ourselves.
Yeah, it's because go
we
ahead.
still call ourselves breastfeeders. We just don't say, you know, we say that if you are nursing, you're a nursing breastfeeder, and if you're exclusive pumper, you're a pumping breastfeeder.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think that's something, and in fact, I will say I've been guilty of that too. Oh, you're exclusively pumping. Well, you're not really breastfeeding. Just what you've said already has helped turn my thought processes around. So exclusive pumpers are breastfeeders.
Yeah, they're still feeding their baby with their breast.
Yes. All right. Anything else, Sarah?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Rachel, would you like to share your journey, your breastfeeding, birthing journey, and also share with us one resource you found helpful during that time?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my journey was a little difficult. I had slight PTSD for a bit. I was in the hospital 3 weeks prior to having my daughter for having a chorioangioma on my placenta that she was working very, very hard to support. Happens in less than 5%, but of course that would be me, right? So I had to experience that. And then she was born 2 months early and had to stay in the NICU for 24 days. So I had to exclusively pump for that amount of time. So bravo to Sarah, because I was ready to throw that pump away immediately after we got out the hospital. During that time, I had a C-section as well. So I had to be, you know, wheeled in and out of the NICU, and I couldn't really stand up to take care of her while she was in the incubator and things like that. So it made it really difficult, and it was a very sad time for me. Because, you know, you're watching your baby grow in a box. It's kind of, you know, hurts your mental space watching moms leave out of the hospital with their babies and you're stuck there. And then when I finally got released, I had to stay at the Ronald McDonald House because my house was an hour and a half away from the hospital that she was staying at. So exclusively pumping, waking up all times of the night, trying to make sure I don't miss my alarms and staying on schedule. And then when I finally was able to latch her for practice feeds, it was the most amazing thing to me, and immediately made me want to and be determined to nurse and latch her for the remainder of our, you know, breastfeeding journey, which wound up just being over in October because my milk dried up because I'm pregnant. So we would still be nursing today. But yeah, so it was a really difficult time, but we made it through. And I'm grateful that we were able to latch, and I was able to exclusively just nurse her and only pump when we were away. So that was exciting for me. As far as a resource that was helpful during the journey, I would say it was, at that time I was in Missouri, so we were at St. Luke's, and it was the milk bank, because I was able to have that donor milk while I was pumping like 3 drops of colostrum, and she wasn't able to latch. So the milk bank was awesome in supplying that donor milk for us. So I now work at a milk bank, so I feel like I'm giving back. So that it was a great experience. I don't wish to relive it, but it was a great experience.
So it's come full circle for you, Rachel.
Right.
Okay, going back to the milk bank. That is awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you. So we've just got some interesting resources that were helpful. Community organizations, social media, milk bank. Great input, folks. Elizabeth, I want to kind of go back to you, because I believe you're the only one who has delivered during the pandemic, and wanted to find out what has been different for you during your birth and breastfeeding journey during the pandemic.
Oh gosh. Well, just being pregnant during the pandemic was very anxiety ridden for me. So there was a lot of uncertainty. I would say that, I mean, still to this day, like, I don't know what level of anxiety is normal. And if like maybe I should have like spoken more to a provider about my anxiety, just because I just, there's no baseline for what is too anxious because of everything that's going on. Like, you're a little hesitant to go see a doctor because of exposure and the uncertainty of what happens at the time, of, what happens if you're pregnant and get COVID, if your baby gets it. So it was a really tough time. Like, I don't think I was ever excited about being pregnant like I was with the other ones, because it was kind of just nerve-wracking for me. But, my care was great. They were really nice. I was able to have my husband there. I know early on in the pandemic, other states weren't allowing, a support person. So it's nice to have my husband there. And they were very thorough, I would say. Like, they were really trying to, like, when I was getting released, they were trying to offer me as much services as they could. So that way, if I didn't feel comfortable, I didn't have to go in again.
Okay.
That makes sense. Until, my post-birth appointment with my doctor.
Okay. Feel like any of the resources were, it sounds like resource level, you feel like it might have even been more available resource-wise with during your hospitalization this time than previous.
Yeah.
Yes,
I see, that's the hard part, because, I'm just more educated now on the issues, because having a child that already had a tongue tie, my second, they found the tongue tie, got fixed right away. Breastfeeding Journey was great after that. And with the third, I asked them to check for it. So I don't know if that's a normal process that they do check for you if you ask, because, they understood that I didn't want to have to come back in a couple of weeks to see a specialist to diagnose tongue tie, that they went ahead and checked it there at the hospital. So I don't know if that's normal, if that's part of the process, or they just did it because of COVID.
How about lactation support? Did you receive some lactation support in hospital during the pandemic?
Yes. The lactation consultant came. The baby latched well. Had a little bit of latching problems because she had jaundice. So whenever she was crying a lot, and it was just, she was getting mad and angry feeding. And so prior to, though, when she first latched on, it was perfect. But after that, I had a little bit of issues because of jaundice and being away from me, and, making her stay in a bed by herself. And under
Was
there
lactation support available after you went home? Did they give you resources for support after you left? Or?
They did give me resources, like, there's lots of handouts. I really wish that more time was spent like one-on-one talking about, you know, hey, if you have problems, you know, if you think it's a latch problem, come talk to a lactation consultant. If you think it's more, talk to an IBCLC. I've used the hotline previously, not this past baby, but previously the hotline always, you know, referred me to a lactation consultant. But I think there's a missing piece there, like it, you know, besides, you know, the proper latch and whatnot, like if you really think there's other issues that, you know, this is the gradual progression, like who to see next.
Okay. Last question here then. And I think this time we'll start with Rachel. What can you suggest to providers or workers in the maternal child health field that would make it easier and more convenient to reach out and support new families?
I would definitely say making sure that they leave after having the baby, that they leave with the support. You know, a lot of times it feels like when you leave, at least for me, it felt like when I left the hospital, it was like, okay, now what? You know, like now I have to figure out how to grow this human safely, you know, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Because when you're in the hospital, you know, you have the nurses, you have the people checking in, you can ask all the questions, and then you leave and it's like, all right, it's just us, you know, what do I do next? So I think that would have been a lot more helpful to me. I can agree with, is it Sarah that just spoke? As far as like during COVID, because I'm pregnant now. And so it's kind of like nerve wracking because it's like, are we gonna have spikes again? What's gonna go on? I've had COVID myself while pregnant. And so it's all kind of like just up in the air. And so when you're like confused or you don't feel like you have that support system or someone that you can, you know, immediately pick up the phone and be like, okay, I need to call so-and-so, you know, being in the field now, I have plenty of resources of people I can call, but for people who aren't like me, that aren't in the field, or moms that don't know where to turn, especially if they're trying to breastfeed, it can be really, really stressful if they don't have anyone that they know who they can reach out to. And sometimes when you're in the hospital, for me, the lactation consultant she came and saw me one time. So after that, she was like, we'll do practice feeds, and then that's it. And then after that, it was just me and the baby trying to figure this thing out. Unless I specifically was like, okay, I need to speak to her, and then, oh, she's off this day, or, you know, so it's just, sometimes you just need a support system. I know for me and my family, out of everyone, I was the only one that was breastfed, and I had never seen anyone breastfeed except for one of my friends. So I was on Google all the time, joining groups, you know, support groups online, but it would have been nice to have someone physically there, or someone I could that was easily accessible for me.
So you mentioned when you left the hospital, you wish you would have had maybe a list of would it be a list of numbers? Would it be like where I was, we gave a magnet with a phone number on it? Would it be, is there something specific that you felt like you could have had that would be helpful?
Someone's like, so here in Oklahoma, it's honestly a little bit better than it was when I was in Missouri. In Missouri, like we had I had the IBCLC that came in the room one time, but after she left, I didn't have like her number or anything like that. I would have to ask the doctor or the nurse, and then it went down the chain, and then someone finally came back 3 hours later or something. It was like, oh, she's not here today, or she'll be back on Monday, or something like that. You know, it wasn't, they didn't give me a phone number for her or anything like that. And so when I got out, there also wasn't support groups or anything. And I think that's important as well for here. When people are getting out of the hospital and things like that. Now, support group wise, it's going to be social media because of COVID and stuff. And so we got to figure out how to make everything just more easily accessible, so people aren't just going to blogs or Google and finding out stuff that's not necessarily evidence-based.
Great. That's very informative. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Sarah?
Actually, before the other Sarah, if we can just have this be we've got a few more minutes. So yeah, Sarah, if you want to give your
and that'll be it.
Your take to that, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that the call, making that call that happens sometimes. Sometimes the lactation support will call a mom a week out after they leave the hospital. I think that is really important. I know I personally got a call from my lactation support person at the hospital I delivered at. And when that call came, I was actually in my third hospital at that point. It was a week out. But I remember when she called and I was like, whoa, they are actually following up on me with me about breastfeeding. That was really awesome, you know. So I think that doing that is helpful. It helps you to stay in contact, and it can also gives the mom a little bit of a reminder that she doesn't have to be alone in that process. You know, like there are people out there that can help and that they want to help, you know. So make the phone call, because it's very difficult for moms to remember all the things that they need to remember, especially if something crazy happened during their childbirth, you know. So I would just reiterate that giving resources, like Rachel said, you know, giving resources to the mom that are written that she can refer to somehow, go back and look at them. You know, that would be something also that can be helpful, so that you're not just trying to recall all of the information from your memory. You know, that you can pull something up and say, where was that piece of paper that they told me to look at that had all those, or what was that, what, you know, you can actually have a resource to look at. So so yeah, that's what I would add.
Fabulous. Wow. Thank you all so very much for your input. As I said, I think the view of moms is probably more important than our view of as providers as to what we think you need. So I definitely appreciate the input, and I hope that everybody else was able to kind of get a few different ideas of ways we can support moms going forward. So thank you again.